All right, this is part 2 of my intro to fabric fodder video. And in this one, I'm just going to kind of go over, in general, some of the types of materials that we will be using. In this part, I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of materials we will use to modify our fabrics and textiles. And in the next part, I'll talk about the actual fabrics and textiles and the prep work for some of those. So I just kind of want to just do a general overview. And I've got a lot of stuff sitting on my desk here, so let's go ahead and get started. First off, in painting on fabrics, you can use just inexpensive acrylic liquid paint. You can also use acrylic paint. Sorry, just trying to get the camera going here. In tubes. It can be, just the inexpensive stuff. It can be the better, like paper artsy stuff. We can bring in liquid, the much more fluid type acrylics. Here's some other. So any of these can work on fabric. The biggest thing, if you want them to be washable, is you have to add, let's see if I can reach this here, some medium that's for fabric. And most of the like folk art and deco art, as well as golden, all have a fabric medium if you want to make your thing washable over the long term. Now, I have for years and years that very first, fix this a little bit. There we go. That very first, like I said, it is what it is. That very first video with the t-shirt was using just your basic liquid acrylics. And if you heat set it with a dry iron, I always put something over it. But if you heat set it for 30 seconds to a minute, typically it's not going to wash out. But if you want to add a medium to it, this will also help to make it washable. Now, a lot of the fabric fodder that I'm going to be creating, I'm not using in products that are going to be projects that are going to be washed. So it really comes down to it's not super critical. But with acrylic paints, you can add the medium to make that more washable. Some of the other things that I'm also going to be using, I'm going to be using some acrylic inks, other inks. There's another acrylic ink. You can also use sprays from various manufacturers. You can take pigments and add them to a medium to create a fabric like paint. I also use gouache. I've used printing ink. Now this happens to be for screen printing, and this is designed specifically for fabric. And with screen printing, again, you can use screen printing ink, or you can use any acrylics when you're doing that sort of thing. Some of the things that we'll play with is some spray paint, so you can, act like you're out on the streets doing that. Some of the techniques that I'm going to teach you about also uses some specialized type of paints. For instance, with this set of color, you can do sun printing and that sort of thing. Let me get these all packed back up on my little tray to get them out of our way. But so you can use any of those kind of paints. You can also use watercolors. And I'm going to show you a fun way to do that so that it doesn't bleed through as much. Obviously, jelly printing is massive these days. So you can also use jelly printing on your fabric. And these come in sizes and shapes and that sort of thing. So I've used that as well. You can also uncolor. You can use bleach. These bleach pens that are thickened bleach. I've used these, for probably 25 years when they first came out. I've used bleach. The challenge with bleach is that you have to work in a well-ventilated space, and you also have to be careful because it can burn right through your fabric. And I will show some things using bleach and also talk about the safety concerns. Jacquard also has a really cool product out called Decolorant. Works the same way. It comes in both a liquid form and a kind of, it's like kind of like mediums. It's kind of thickened, and so that you can use that, and this will remove color off of fabrics and textiles. We also will talk about paints and such that are specifically for fabric. So you can purchase fabric, this is some plaid ones, so you can purchase fabric paints, and those work amazing. There are ones that are 3D, so if you want to have like some 3D aspects to them. And then also Jacquard has two different kinds of fabric type paints. Lumiere's, which I've used, I had some that were ancient. So I bought, they come in packs. You can get them in either this size of bottle, or they come in these smaller ones. And with these smaller ones, what's really fun to do is you can get a set that's like 8 to 10 of them. And that way it gives you small amounts. You don't need a lot. But the Lumiere is like an acrylic paint for on fabrics, and the Dynaflows are almost like an ink-like consistency, and they're really designed more to do on silks, though I have used them on other type of fabrics. So that's what I have so many colors of these, because these are some of these that are from these little sets that you can get. And so those are really nifty to have and to play with. We'll also talk about doing stuff with dyes. I could do an entire series on just using Procyon dyes and that sort of thing, but I don't know that I necessarily may. I may do a class on using dyes and such, but we'll keep it simple. But there's a million and two things out there, but we are going to talk about different things of using dyes. Now these are Procyon dyes. These are a good quality dye. You can also use RIT dyes. I've done that myself. Nowadays, there's a million and two different, in the big box stores, there's all these tie-dye kits that you can get. You can also get dye sprays, so you can just spray it on. But what I'm going to be showing you is some things of taking your Procyon dyes and adding some alginate to them, and that thickens them, so that way you can use dyes in stenciling, in stamping. That ugly 80s fabric that I had, that was a carved stamp that the dye was thickened with alginate. So we're going to touch on some different techniques using dyes and that also during the course of this course. Then there's also cyanotype, which is near and dear to my heart as an architect. I'm not quite old enough to actually have cyanotype, the actual quote unquote blueprints, the blueprints with the white lines on it. But I am old enough to where it was a cyanotype type of materials that we used, where we had layers of mylar that were sandwiched with specially treated, which was basically what's in these specially treated papers. Light shines through it, exposes it. And so we ended up, they were called blue lines. So it was blue lines on white, but it was essentially cyanotype. So I have some familiarity with that from my youth. So other things that we will incorporate is we can use stamps, whether they're mounted or unmounted, or foam stamps. We can carve stamps. There's also, you can use acrylic stamps. We're also going to talk about carving to create stamps, whether you're using erasers or linoleum blocks. But those are like awesome for using. You can go completely off into a whole direction of doing printing and such onto fabrics. Don't know that we're going to necessarily hit on that other than just touching on it. Also, we are going to use stencils and such. So all of this stuff can be incorporated into your fabric fodder. Then a couple other things that we can use is different types of pastels. I don't like necessarily using oil pastels on fabric just because they're hard to use in terms of they don't really truly dry. But they do have a juiciness and a soft butteriness. So we may play with that. Hard to say. This is just what I'm thinking of at this point. So I have some just standard soft pastels, hard pastels, and pan pastels. So we're going to be touching on all of those kinds of pastels. We can also touch on different kinds of marking tools, whether it's color pencils, it's needle color crayons, which I showed you that one piece of fabric that I use those on. And then there's fabric pens that you can get. There's all of these kinds of things between the fabric pens, the fabric paints, fabric sprays, none of this was available back in the 70s, 80s, 90s when I was doing so much more with textiles. So it's cool to see these kinds of things coming out. Excuse me, Posca pens. These are a staple. There's deco art pens, or deco brush pens. These also are cool to be able to use. There's any number of just kind of quote unquote felt pens. You can even use alcohol ink pens. But these are great for marking, especially the different kinds of pens that come in different thicknesses and such. There's pencils, any number. I love using these big fat juicy ones, China markers. Anything that you can make a marker on paper, you can also make a mark on fabric. The different kinds of soft crayons, like the distress crayons and my brain just went completely gelatos. I'm like, oh, what are these called? I just love it when my brain just goes. So if you need, the soft buttery kind of things, those kinds of pens work as well. But that's a lot of the different kinds of things that we're going to be using to mark with, draw with, paint with, dye with, all of that, stamp, stencil, just all sorts of things. We'll also touch on echo dyeing, though there's a ton of videos out available for doing things like echo dyeing. So just like there are for dyeing as well. So what I'm trying to do is show things of how we can use those kinds of things to create our fabric fodder, and then using our fabric fodder to create in books or quilts or other kinds of mixed media art that you want to. So that's just a super fast overview of the different kinds of materials that over the next months, I'm going to show you how to use those for creating your own fabric fodder. Thanks a bunch.